Have you ever had someone sell your property right in front of you and then send you a thank you note for your generous contribution to the community? My name is Alice Vasquez. I am 42 years old, a former forensic accountant. I bought a 15-acre pine farm that sat completely outside any HOA boundaries. I had a clear deed. I had legal paperwork. But when I returned after 3 weeks of handling business in the city, 847 Fraser fir Christmas trees had vanished from my land. Nothing left but stumps cut clean to the ground. Donna Perez, HOA president, had sold them in her holiday fundraiser. She had no idea who I was. She had no idea I had spent 15 years tracking financial fraud for a living, and she certainly had no idea that when I started digging, I would expose not just the theft of my trees, but her entire 6-year scheme. If you have ever had someone take what belongs to you and laugh in your face, this story is for you. Stay until the end. November 28th. 1 week before my first Christmas tree season was supposed to begin, I had spent 3 weeks in the city finalizing paperwork, setting up business accounts, and ordering supplies for the farm stand I planned to build at the entrance of my property. If you have ever poured everything you have into a dream, you will understand what I felt driving down that dirt road toward my land. My father had grown Christmas trees in New Mexico for 30 years before he passed. This farm was supposed to be my way of continuing something he started, of building a life that meant more than spreadsheets and audit reports. Stay with me through this story, because what I discovered that morning changed everything I believed about property rights, community trust, and the lengths people will go to protect their little kingdoms. The morning fog was lifting off the hills as I turned onto the gravel path that led to the eastern field. I could see the outline of the Fraser firs in the distance, or at least, I thought I could. I parked my truck at the edge of the property and stepped out into the cold November air. Something was wrong. The silhouette I had seen from the road was not my trees. It was the tree line of the forest beyond my property, visible now because nothing was blocking it. I walked forward slowly, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. And that was when I saw them row after row of stumps, cut clean and low to the earth. The Fraser firs that had taken 8 years to grow. The trees I had purchased along with this land 4 months ago. The entire foundation of my new life gone. I counted as I walked. 47 stumps in the first row. 18 rows total. 847 trees had been harvested from my land while I was away, at $85 retail per tree. That was over $70,000 in inventory. It was also my entire projected income for the first year, the money I needed to pay the mortgage, to fund the replanting, to survive until the next harvest cycle. I stood in the middle of that empty field, surrounded by stumps and silence, and felt the weight of what had been taken settle into my chest like a stone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I took out my phone and began photographing everything with the same methodical precision I had used for 15 years tracking financial fraud. The stumps, the tire tracks from heavy trucks had carved deep ruts across my field, the broken fence posts where they had entered. Emotion would come later. Right now, I need evidence. I called the county sheriff's office and reported a theft. The dispatcher said someone would be out within the hour. I sat on a stump that had once been a 7-foot tree and waited, watching my breath form clouds in the cold morning air. Deputy James Kowalski arrived 40 minutes later in a tan patrol vehicle. I walked him through the field, showing him the stumps and the tire tracks. He listened, took notes, and then asked a question that stopped me cold. "Ma'am, have you talked to the HOA about this?" I told him I did not belong to any homeowners association. My property was agricultural land, zoned separately from the subdivision next door, purchased specifically because it was independent. Kowalski flipped through his notebook. "According to my records, this parcel falls within Pinewood Ridge HOA boundaries, has since 2019. That was impossible. I had the deed in my filing cabinet at home. The legal description was clear. I told him there must be an error in his database. He shrugged and handed me a card. Talk to Donna Perez at the HOA office. She runs things over there. She'll sort it out. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel. Database error, clerical mistake, bureaucratic confusion. I cycled through explanations, but none of them fit the facts. The timing 3 weeks when I was away. The scale nearly every mature tree on my property. The confidence in Kowalski's voice when he cited HOA jurisdiction over land that had never belonged to them. This was not random. Something about it felt rehearsed, coordinated, deliberate. I pulled into my driveway and checked the mailbox out of habit. 2 envelopes, a utility bill, and a crisp white envelope from Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association. I opened it standing next to my truck, the cold wind cutting through my jacket. Inside were 2 documents. The first was an invoice for $2,400 annual HOA dues, due within 30 days. The second was a letter on official letterhead, signed by Donna Perez, HOA President. Dear homeowner, thank you for your generous contribution to our annual holiday tree fundraiser. Your donation of Christmas trees from the community common area will help fund neighborhood beautification projects and our children's scholarship program. We appreciate your community spirit and look forward to your continued participation in Pinewood Ridge events. I read the letter 3 times. Donation, community common area, contribution. They had taken 847 trees from my private property, sold them as part of a fundraiser, and sent me a thank you note as if I had volunteered them. According to their records, my land I had purchased, the land I held the deed to, the land that had been independently owned for decades, now belonged to them. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Then I walked inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Donna Perez had stolen from the wrong person, and I was going to prove it. The Pinewood Ridge HOA office occupied a corner of the community clubhouse, a sprawling single-story building with white columns and manicured hedges that announced its importance to anyone driving past. I arrived at 9 in the morning, deed in hand, prepared for what I assumed would be a straightforward conversation about a bureaucratic error. I had dealt with far more complicated disputes in my career offshore accounts. Shell corporations, forensic reconstructions of deliberately destroyed records. A boundary mix-up with a suburban homeowners association should have been simple. I parked in the visitor lot, walked through the double glass doors, and asked the receptionist if I could speak with Donna Perez. She made a phone call, smiled politely, and told me Mrs. Perez would see me shortly. 15 minutes later, I was escorted into a wood-paneled office where the woman who had sold my trees sat behind a mahogany desk, waiting for me with a smile that never reached her eyes. Donna Perez was in her late 50s, with silver blonde hair styled in a precise bob and the kind of calm authority that comes from years of unchallenged power. She stood to shake my hand, gestured for me to sit, and opened the conversation as if she were welcoming a new neighbor to the community. Ms. Vasquez, I'm so glad you came in. I understand there's been some confusion about your property, and I want to help clear that up. Her tone was warm, almost maternal, but I had spent too many years across the table from people who lied for a living to be fooled by warmth. I placed my deed on her desk and explained the situation clearly. My land had never been part of any HOA. I had the legal documentation to prove it, and I wanted to know who had authorized the removal of my trees. Donna listened without interrupting, her expression sympathetic, her hands folded neatly on the desk in front of her. When I finished, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was a map, a boundary map of Pinewood Ridge HOA with my property shaded in light blue, labeled as Common Area, Agricultural Reserve. She slid it across the desk toward me. I understand your confusion. Ms. Vasquez, the previous owner may not have informed you, but this parcel was incorporated into our HOA boundaries in 2019. It's all been properly filed with the county. She tapped the map with one manicured fingernail. Those trees you're asking about were located in a designated common area. The association has the right to manage and utilize common area resources for community benefit. That's in our CC&Rs. I told her that it was impossible. I had reviewed the title history before purchasing the property. There was no mention of any HOA annexation. I had a clear deed with a legal description that did not reference Pinewood Ridge in any way. Donna's smile did not waver. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Let me clear this up right now." She put the call on speaker. A woman answered someone in the county clerk's office. Donna asked her to confirm the current boundary status of my parcel number. I listened as the clerk typed, paused, and then read back exactly what Donna had told me. The parcel had been incorporated into Pinewood Ridge HOA in August 2019, pursuant to a boundary amendment approved by the county commissioner's office. The clerk asked if there was anything else. Donna thanked her and hung up. "As you can see," she said, sliding the map back into its folder, "this is a settled matter. The county has the records. Everything was done properly." She leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from sympathetic to something harder. "Now, I understand you're upset about the trees, but those trees were community property, and their sale was authorized by this board. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to file a complaint with the county or pursue legal action. But I should warn you, our association has a legal defense fund of over $180,000. We've dealt with frivolous lawsuits before." I asked her what she meant by frivolous. She smiled again, but this time there was no pretense of warmth. "I mean that people who challenge this community tend to find it more expensive than they anticipated. Lawyers cost money, court fees add up, and in the meantime, you still owe $2,400 in annual dues, plus any assessments the board might levy for unpaid balances." She paused, letting that sink in. "Of course, if you'd prefer to cooperate, I'm sure we can work something out. Perhaps a payment plan for the dues. Perhaps a seat on our beautification committee, so you can have input on how the fundraiser proceeds are spent. We're a reasonable community, Ms. Vasquez. We just expect our members to follow the rules." The implication was clear. Comply or be crushed. Pay the money they claimed I owed for membership in an organization I had never joined, or face legal and financial warfare I could not afford. I stood up and told her I would be reviewing my options. Donna stood as well, extending her hand as if we had just concluded a pleasant business meeting. "I hope you'll make the right choice. This is a wonderful community. Most people find that once they stop fighting and start participating, they're much happier." I did not shake her hand. I walked out of her office, through the clubhouse lobby, and into the parking lot, my mind racing through everything I had just heard. The county records had been changed. Someone had filed documents claiming my land was part of this HOA, and those documents had been accepted as legitimate. This was not a misunderstanding. This was fraud coordinated, documented, and apparently blessed by at least one person in the county clerk's office. As I reached my truck, I heard voices behind me. Donna was standing at the clubhouse entrance, speaking with a woman who looked enough like her to be a sister. I caught fragments of their conversation carried on the wind. "Tree lot set up Saturday morning. Make sure the signs are ready. Should clear at least 60,000 this year." I stopped with my hand on the door handle. Saturday. 3 days from now. They were going to sell my trees they had already cut and presumably stored somewhere at their holiday fundraiser, and according to every official record, they had every right to do so. I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove away. But I did not go home. I went to the county clerk's office, because if someone had changed those records, there would be a trail, and I was going to find it. The county clerk's office was a beige government building 20 minutes from Pinewood Ridge, staffed by people who looked like they had been processing paperwork since before I was born. I walked in with a list of documents I needed: the boundary amendment from 2019, the original HOA incorporation papers, any surveys or plat maps associated with the annexation of my parcel, and the signatures of all parties who had approved the change. The woman at the counter took my requests without comment and disappeared into a back room. 30 minutes later, she returned with a stack of photocopies and a receipt for $12 in copying fees. I carried the documents to a table in the corner and began to read. The boundary amendment was dated July 22, 2019, and filed with the county on August 3rd of the same year. It described the incorporation of 3 parcels into Pinewood Ridge HOA, including mine, then owned by a man named Edward Harper. According to the document, Harper had consented to the annexation as part of a community development initiative that would provide shared access to agricultural resources. His signature appeared at the bottom of the consent form, notarized by someone named Linda Perez Marsh. I searched for Pinewood Ridge HOA board members on my phone. Linda Perez Marsh was listed as secretary. Public records confirmed what the surname suggested: she was Donna Perez's younger sister. The person who had notarized Edward Harper's consent was the HOA president's own family. The amendment had been approved by the county commissioner's office with minimal documentation. No public hearing notice, no environmental review, no evidence that adjacent landowners had been notified as required by state law. The survey attached to the filing was a boundary description copied from an older plat map dated 1987. Not a certified survey conducted by a licensed professional. No new measurements, no licensed surveyor's stamp. Just a photocopy of decades-old records presented as current verification. I went back to the counter and requested all boundary amendments filed by Pinewood Ridge HOA since 2017. The clerk returned with another stack. 7 parcels had been added to the HOA's jurisdiction over 6 years. All of them shared the same characteristics: minimal documentation, no certified surveys, and consent forms signed by landowners I could not verify. I pulled additional records on the current HOA board. Donna Perez as president. Her sister Linda is the secretary. Roger Flores as treasurer. His landscaping company had received over $90,000 in HOA contracts over 4 years, according to the expenditure reports filed with the state. Carol Hayes as vice president, Donna's college roommate. According to an archived alumni newsletter I found online, Rick Shelton, as an at-large member, is the only one with no apparent connection to the inner circle. 5 board members, 4 of them tied directly to Donna through family, business, or personal loyalty. Every vote, every decision, every amendment controlled by one woman and the people who owed her. I tried calling 3 attorneys that afternoon. The first declined when I mentioned Pinewood Ridge conflict of interest with existing clients in the community. The second wanted $25,000 as a retainer before he would even review the documents. The third never returned my call. By evening, the tree lot sale was 3 days away. My savings were nearly depleted, and I had no legal representation. I sat in my truck outside the county building as the sun went down, watching employees leave for the day, and forced myself to think clearly. The evidence was there. The pattern was there. But without help, I could not move fast enough to stop what was coming. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my property, photographing the boundary markers and looking for anything I might have missed. An elderly man in a worn canvas jacket was walking along the fence line to the north. He stopped when he noticed me and made his way over with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who had learned patience from decades of outdoor work. His name was Walter Bennett. He asked if I was the one who had bought Ed Harper's place. I told him I was. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the empty field behind me where the stumps still stood in their silent rows. "I heard what happened to your trees," he said. "Heard Donna Perez is claiming this land belongs to her HOA now." I asked how he knew. "Small town. Word travels, especially when Donna's involved." I asked what he meant. Walter was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much to share with a stranger. "I was the county surveyor for 40 years before I retired. I know every property line in this region down to the foot." He paused, letting that settle. "There was no survey conducted in 2019 to expand Pinewood Ridge's boundaries. None. Any boundary amendment requires a certified survey filed with the county. That's state law. I told him the county had a survey on file. He shook his head. What they have is a boundary description copied from an old plat map. A real survey requires a licensed surveyor to physically measure the property and certify the results. That never happened. I still know people in the office. I would have heard. He looked at me directly, his weathered face serious. And Ed Harper was a friend of mine. I talked to him regularly until the day he died. He never agreed to join any HOA. Hated the idea. Said he'd rather let the land go fallow than give Donna Perez 1 inch of control. I asked when Ed Harper had died. Walter's expression darkened. March 15th, 2019. The consent form was dated July 22nd, 2019, 4 months after Edward Harper was dead. I thanked Walter and asked if he would be willing to help me prove what had happened. He hesitated, glancing back toward the road as if checking whether anyone was watching. I'm an old man, Ms. Vasquez. I've seen what Donna does to people who cross her. Lawsuits, harassment, rumors that destroy reputations. I can't be publicly involved. But before he turned to leave, he reached into his jacket and handed me a folded piece of paper. Original survey from 1987. The real boundaries. Compare it to what they filed. He walked away without another word, disappearing into the tree line as he had never been there. That night. I sat at my kitchen table with both documents side by side. The 1987 survey showed my property as an independent parcel with clear boundaries. No connection to any subdivision or homeowners association. The 2019 amendment claimed the same land had been voluntarily incorporated into Pinewood Ridge HOA with the consent of a dead man. I pulled up county death records online and found the confirmation I already knew was coming. Edward James Harper died March 15, 2019. Signature on HOA consent form, July 22, 2019. Notarized by the HOA president's sister. Filed without a proper survey. Approved without public hearing. I looked at the list of 7 parcels annexed over 6 years. 7 properties, 7 consent forms. How many of those signatures belonged to people who were dead, incapacitated, or simply never asked? My 847 trees were not an isolated theft. They were the latest harvest from a system designed to take what it wanted and bury the evidence in paperwork no one was supposed to question. I woke before dawn on Friday morning, 2 days before the tree lot sale, and made a decision. Confrontation had gotten me nowhere. Donna Perez had the county records on her side, a board that would rubber stamp anything she wanted, and enough money to bury me in legal fees. Fighting her directly was exactly what she expected and exactly what she was prepared for. The front door was locked. I would find another way in. I drove to the county clerk's office as soon as it opened and filed formal public records requests for everything Pinewood Ridge HOA was legally required to disclose. Meeting minutes from 2017 to present, annual financial statements and budget reports, all contracts with vendors exceeding $1,000, reserve fund statements, assessment collection records, insurance policies. The Davis-Sterling Act required HOAs in California to provide these documents to any member upon request, and since Donna claimed I was a member, I intended to use that claim against her. The clerk accepted my requests and told me the documents would be ready within 10 business days. The sale would be over by then, but this was no longer just about stopping one sale. This was about building a case that could not be ignored. While I waited for the official records, I constructed a timeline. Edward Harper died March 15, 2019. His signature appeared on a consent form dated July 22, 4 months later. The notary was Linda Perez Marsh, Donna's sister. The amendment was filed on August 3rd and approved without a certified survey or public hearing. 7 parcels had been annexed using similar methods over 6 years. I cross-referenced dates with public death records and property transfer documents available through the county assessor's website. 2 of the annexed properties had belonged to individuals who died within a year of their consent forms being filed. A third belonged to an 89-year-old woman in a memory care facility. Her parcel had been added in 2020, and I found no record of any family member or legal guardian signing on her behalf. The pattern was consistent: target the vulnerable. Obtain consent through forgery or manipulation. Absorb the land before anyone noticed. That afternoon, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The sender identified himself only by initials AP, and the message was brief. Ms. Vasquez, I work in the county clerk's office. I've seen your records requests. There are discrepancies in the Pinewood Ridge filings that have concerned me for some time, but I lack the standing to investigate formally. If you want to understand how deep this goes, request the original HOA incorporation documents from 1992 and compare them to the current boundary filings. Pay attention to parcel numbers. Some of them don't exist in the county's master database. When I tried to reply, the message bounced back as undeliverable. Whoever AP was, they had created a temporary account, sent one message, and disappeared. They wanted to help, but they wanted no trail leading back to them. I followed the lead. The original incorporation documents showed Pinewood Ridge HOA was established in 1992 with 47 residential parcels and a clearly defined boundary that ended 200 feet from Edward Harper's property line. The current boundary map claimed 61 parcels. 14 had been added over the years, 7 in the last 6 years alone. I ran each parcel number through the county's online database. 12 came back with valid records. 2 returned errors, parcel not found. Numbers that existed on HOA documents but had no corresponding entry in the county's official system. I tried alternate searches by address, by previous owner name, by adjacent parcel reference. Nothing. These parcels did not exist in any county record outside of Pinewood Ridge's own filings. Either the database was corrupted, or someone had created fictional parcels to inflate the HOA's claimed territory and justify additional assessments. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. I drove past the community center on my way to check the mailbox and saw workers setting up the tree lot white tents, string lights, a banner that read, Pinewood Ridge Holiday Fundraiser, supporting our community. My trees would be there tomorrow, tagged and priced, sold to families who had no idea they were buying stolen property. I forced myself to keep driving. The financial documents arrived that morning not from the county, but from the HOA itself. A thick envelope sat in my mailbox with a cover letter from Donna Perez reminding me that my annual dues remained outstanding. I spread the documents across my kitchen table. 5 years of financial statements, revenue reports, expense breakdowns. And there, in the 2022 annual report, holiday tree lot revenue $67, $450, designated for Community Beautification Fund. I pulled up the HOA's publicly filed bank statements through the Secretary of State's business database. December 2022 deposits showed $12,400 from Holiday Fundraiser, no mention of $67,000, no separate entry for a beautification fund. I checked 2021, $43,000 reported, $19,000 deposited, 2020, $38,000 reported, $11,000 deposited, 2019, 2018, the same pattern every year. Reported revenue in the financial statements. A fraction of that amount appears in the actual bank records. The gap between what the HOA claimed to collect and what it actually deposited grew wider with each passing year. I tracked each discrepancy on my laptop, building a table that laid the numbers side by side. 2018, 14,000 missing. 2019, 21,000. 2020, 27,000. 2021, 24,000. 2022, 55,000. And now, 2023, with my 847 trees waiting to be sold at the Saturday lot. 5 years, $341,000 unaccounted for, money collected in the name of the community, reported to make the organization look prosperous and diverted somewhere the official records did not show. The holiday tree lot was not just a fundraiser. It was a pipeline assets harvested from properties Donna did not own, sold to families who did not know, and skimmed before anyone thought to ask where the money went. I saved everything to an encrypted drive and made 3 backup copies, one on a flash drive in my safe, one uploaded to secure cloud storage, and one mailed to myself at a P.O. box I had opened that morning. Then I assessed my position. Walter Bennett had refused to go public. AP at the county clerk's office was a ghost who could vanish at any moment. Every attorney I contacted had declined the case. I had evidence of forgery, fraudulent annexation, and financial manipulation spanning half a decade. What I did not have was proof of where the money ultimately landed, and I did not have a single ally willing to stand beside me in the open. The risk was mine alone. My phone buzzed on the table, a text message from a number I did not recognize. 7 words on the screen. "Stop digging. This is your only warning." I screenshot the message and added it to my evidence file. Donna Perez had just confirmed I was close enough to frighten her. Frightened people make mistakes. I intended to be ready when she made hers. The tree lot sale happened on Sunday without me being able to stop it. I drove past the community center that morning and saw families walking between rows of Fraser firs, children pointing at trees, parents counting cash. My trees, 847 of them, tagged with prices ranging from $65 to $120, sold under a banner celebrating community spirit. I did not stop. I did not make a scene. I had evidence now, and evidence was worth more than a public confrontation that Donna Perez would spin to her advantage. I drove home and continued building my case, adding photographs of the sale to my documentation, but I underestimated how quickly Donna would move to neutralize me. By Monday afternoon, the attack had already begun. The first sign came when I stopped at the hardware store in town to pick up fencing supplies. I had been there twice before, bought materials for the farm stand I was building, and chatted with the owner about the weather and the upcoming holiday season. This time, the man behind the counter looked at me like I had tracked something unpleasant into his store. He told me they were out of the posts I needed. I could see them stacked in the back. When I pointed this out, he said those were reserved for another customer. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. I left without purchasing anything and sat in my truck for a moment, trying to understand what had changed. By the time I got home, I had my answer. The community message board, a neighborhood website where residents posted announcements and warnings, had a new entry at the top, posted that morning by the HOA president's account. The subject line read, "Warning fraudulent land claims in our area." The post did not name me directly, but it did not need to. It described a recent arrival who was attempting to claim ownership of community property through forged documents. It warned residents to be cautious of individuals who might approach them with stories about HOA misconduct. It suggested that this person had a history of similar schemes in other communities and encouraged anyone with information to contact the HOA office or local law enforcement. The language was careful, no explicit accusations. Nothing that would hold up as defamation in court, but the implication was unmistakable. I was the scammer. I was the threat, and the community should treat me accordingly, within hours. The post had dozens of supportive comments. Neighbors I had never met were thanking Donna for protecting them from predators. Someone suggested I should be investigated by the state attorney general. Another wondered aloud whether I had a criminal record. The consequences arrived quickly. The contractor I had hired to repair my barn called on Tuesday morning to cancel our agreement. He was sorry, he said. But he had heard some things and did not want to get involved in whatever was going on with me and the HOA. A delivery service I used for farm supplies informed me that my area was no longer within their coverage zone, a lie so transparent I almost laughed. When I went to check my mailbox on Wednesday afternoon, I found that someone had spray-painted a word across my truck in red letters. The word was thief. I photographed the damage, filed a police report with Deputy Kowalski, who took the information with obvious reluctance and spent 2 hours scrubbing paint off metal in the December cold. The message was clear. Donna Perez had decided that if she could not beat me with paperwork, she would bury me with reputation. Thursday brought an official escalation. A certified letter arrived from the HOA's attorney informing me that I violated community standards for unpermitted agricultural activity on HOA property. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all farming operations and imposed a fine of $500 per day until compliance was achieved. It also notified me that a lien would be filed against my property if the outstanding dues and accumulated fines were not paid within 30 days. The total claimed $4,900 and growing. I calculated the math. At $500 daily, I would owe over $15,000 by the end of the month. More than enough to justify a lien. More than enough, potentially, to force a foreclosure sale if I could not pay. And who would be waiting to purchase the property at auction, I had a guess. My savings were nearly depleted. The trees I had counted on selling were gone, converted into cash that had disappeared into whatever accounts Donna used to hide her embezzlement. I had no income, no legal representation, and a community that now viewed me as a criminal. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at the threatening letter, and allowed myself to consider giving up. I could sell the property, whatever I could get for it, cut my losses, and walk away. Start over somewhere else. Let Donna Perez have her victory. The thought lasted about 30 seconds. Then I remembered Edward Harper, dead for 4 months. When someone forged his signature, I remembered the woman in the memory care facility whose land had been absorbed without her knowledge. I remembered the $341,000 that had vanished from community accounts into pockets that were never audited. Walking away meant leaving those wrongs unaddressed. It meant becoming another name on the list of people Donna had broken. Friday evening. Someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a man I recognized from the HOA board photos, Rick Shelton, the at-large member with no obvious connection to Donna's inner circle. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder at the empty road before speaking. He told me he could not stay long, that he would deny this conversation if anyone asked, but that there were things I needed to know. The tree sale had involved not only my property. Donna had arranged harvests from at least 3 other parcels, all of them technically outside the HOA's legitimate boundaries, all of them belonging to owners who either did not know or could not fight back. The revenue from this year's sale would exceed $70,000, and based on what he had seen in closed board meetings, less than $15,000 would make it into the official accounts. The rest would go where it always went, somewhere Rick had never been allowed to see. But the most important thing, he said, was the lien. Donna was not filing it to collect money. She was filing it to trigger a default. Once the lien was in place and I failed to pay, she could petition for a foreclosure sale. And she had done this before. 2 of the annexed properties, the ones belonging to deceased owners, had been purchased by shell companies at foreclosure auctions. Rick did not know who owned those companies, but he had his suspicions. I asked why he was telling me this. He said he had watched Donna operate for 5 years and stayed quiet because he was afraid. But watching her destroy another person, watching her use the system he was part of to steal someone's land had finally become too much. He could not help me publicly, but he wanted me to know the full picture. He left as quietly as he had arrived, disappearing into the darkness beyond my porch light. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, processing what I had learned. Then I went inside, opened my laptop, and composed an email to a name I had been saving: Tanya Sanders, investigative reporter for the County Herald. I had seen her byline on stories about local government corruption, pension fraud, and misuse of public funds. She had a reputation for thoroughness and for not backing down when powerful people pushed back. I wrote a brief message explaining who I was, what I had discovered, and what I could prove. I attached nothing, not yet. I wanted to see if she would respond before I showed my hand, I read the email twice, then pressed send. The subject line was simple. I have a story about Pinewood Ridge HOA. Tanya Sanders called me Saturday morning. Her voice was direct. No pleasantries, the voice of someone who had learned to cut through noise to find signal. She told me she had been investigating Donna Perez for 2 years. Rumors about financial irregularities. Complaints from former residents who had moved away rather than fight. Whispers about properties changing hands under questionable circumstances. But nothing that would survive the HOA's lawyers. She needed a traceable money trail leading to a named individual. Then she asked what I had. I told her a forged signature dated 4 months after the signer's death. $341,000 in financial discrepancies. Ghost parcels that existed only on HOA maps. And a pattern of targeting vulnerable landowners for fraudulent annexation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I could prove it. I told her I could. She said she would be at my house in 2 hours. Tanya arrived in a dusty sedan with a laptop bag and a digital recorder. She was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and the professional wariness that comes from years of having sources lie to her and subjects threaten her. I spread my documentation across the kitchen table, the timeline. The financial tables. Edward Harper's death certificate alongside his impossible signature. The original 1987 survey. The current HOA boundary map. She recorded the conversation, photographed the key documents, and took a flash drive with everything I had compiled. She handled the materials with the careful attention of someone who understood what she was looking at. This was not the first time she had seen institutional corruption dressed up in the language of community service. She told me she had broken 3 stories in the past 5 years about local organizations using their positions to enrich insiders, a school board contractor scheme. A water district embezzlement case. A charity that existed only on paper. Donna Perez, she said. Fit a pattern she recognized. Before she left, she told me something that shifted my understanding. She had a source inside the county clerk's office who had confirmed the 2019 boundary amendment was flagged internally as potentially fraudulent. The investigation had been quietly dropped after pressure from someone in the commissioner's office. There was a connection between Donna Perez and at least one county official. Though Tanya could not prove what it was, she suspected money had changed hands. What she needed was documentation showing exactly where the $341,000 had gone. Without that, she had a story about sloppy paperwork. With it, she had a story about organized fraud. She asked if I could find that connection. I told her I would not stop until I did. Monday morning. I filed formal complaints with state regulators and the Attorney General's office. The complaints detailed the forged signatures, the fraudulent boundary amendments, the financial discrepancies, and the pattern of predatory annexation. I included copies of all supporting documentation and requested investigations into both the HOA's conduct and the county's failure to enforce filing requirements. These complaints would take months to process, and Donna would have lawyers fighting every step. But once filed, they became part of the official record, something that could not be quietly buried the way the internal flag at the clerk's office had been. I also sent copies to the county commissioner's office. Not because I expected action, but because I wanted them to know they were being watched. Sometimes the threat of exposure moves people who would otherwise stay silent. Tuesday brought a response I had not anticipated. A man appeared at my door mid-afternoon, identifying himself as Alexander Peterson from the county clerk's office. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s. With the cautious demeanor of someone who knew he was taking a risk by standing on my porch in daylight. He told me he was AP, the one who had sent the anonymous email. He had seen my complaints enter the state system, and he had decided that staying invisible was no longer enough. He had pulled the original filing records for all 7 annexed parcels and found problems with everyone. Missing notarizations on 3 consent forms. Survey references citing documents that did not exist in the county archive. signatures that failed to match other records on file for the same individuals. He could not make accusations. He was a clerk, not an investigator, but he could confirm that what I had found was real. And he could point me toward one more piece of evidence. Alexander told me about the reserve fund transfers every January. The Pinewood Ridge HOA moved money from its operating account to something called the Community Beautification Reserve. The transfers appeared in the annual financial statements I had already reviewed, but when he searched the state's registered business database, a public system that tracked all organizational accounts receiving community association funds, he found nothing. The account number on the HOA's filings did not correspond to any registered entity in California. It appeared to be a private account disguised as an organizational fund. He did not know whose name was on it, but he knew it was not the HOA's. I asked why he was willing to help now, after staying hidden for so long. He looked at the floor before answering. His grandmother had lived in a small house on the eastern edge of the county until she died 3 years ago. She had been fiercely independent, refused to move into assisted living, and maintained her garden until the week she passed. Her property had been absorbed by a different HOA 6 months after her death, using methods that sounded remarkably similar to what Donna Perez was doing, a consent form that appeared out of nowhere, a boundary amendment filed without proper survey, a foreclosure sale when no one contested the manufactured liens. By the time his family realized what had happened, the land had been sold to a developer who built 3 houses where her garden used to be. He had been watching Pinewood Ridge ever since, waiting for someone with the evidence and the willingness to fight. He thought I might be that person. Wednesday passed in silence. I kept my phone charged and my laptop open, waiting for responses from the agencies I had contacted, half expecting another threat from Donna's camp. Nothing came. I used the time to organize my files, to make sure every document was labeled and backed up, to prepare for whatever came next. Thursday morning, I woke to find another anonymous email different from AP's original account. Different from any address I recognized. No text. Just a subject line and an attachment. The subject read, "From someone who wants her stopped." The attachment was a scanned bank deposit slip dated December 15th of the previous year. Amount $55,000. Source notation, Holiday Tree Lot, PRHOA. Account holder's name. Printed clearly at the top, Donna M. Perez. Not the Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association, not the Community Beautification Reserve. Donna Perez. Personally. Someone inside her operation, someone with access to banking records, had handed me the smoking gun. The tree lot money was not being diverted to a mysterious fund. It was going directly into her pocket. I verified the image metadata, saved it to my encrypted archive, and forwarded a copy to Tanya Sanders. One line of text I found where the money went. Tanya Sanders called me back within an hour of receiving the deposit slip. Her voice had changed. There was an edge to it now. The sound of a journalist who knows she has the story and is calculating how to land it. She had already verified the account number through a contact at the State Banking Commission. The account was real, registered to Donna Marie Perez at an address that matched the HOA president's home. Not a business account, not a nonprofit fund. A personal checking account that had received direct deposits from HOA fundraising activities for at least 4 years. Tanya had cross-referenced the deposit dates with the annual tree lot sales and found a match for every December going back to 2019. The pattern was complete. Donna Perez had been stealing from her own community for years, hiding the theft behind the language of beautification funds and community improvement projects. And no one had ever thought to check whether the money actually went where she said it did. I asked Tanya what came next. She told me she had enough to publish, but she wanted to do it right. She was coordinating with her editor to run the story the following Monday, 5 days away. That would give her time to verify every claim independently, to reach out to Donna for comment, and to ensure the newspaper's lawyers were comfortable with the legal exposure. She had also contacted the county council's office to inform them of what she had found. The council's office had been non-committal, but Tanya suspected they would act once the story went public. Politicians did not like being caught flat-footed by investigative journalism. Finally, she had forwarded the financial evidence to a contact at the FBI field office who handled wire fraud cases. The amounts involved, over $300,000 moved through electronic transfers across state lines, met the threshold for federal interest. Whether they would open an investigation depended on factors beyond her control. But the referral was in the system. The wheels were turning. I spent the weekend preparing for what was coming. I organized my evidence files one more time, making sure every document was properly labeled and backed up in multiple locations. I drafted a written statement summarizing what I knew and how I had discovered it, in case I needed to provide testimony to investigators. I reviewed the timeline of events, looking for any gaps in the chain of evidence that Donna's lawyers might exploit. And I thought about what would happen when the story broke. My name would be in the article Tanya had asked permission, and I had given it. The community that had been turned against me would learn that I was not the scammer Donna had claimed, but the person who had exposed the real fraud. Some of them would apologize. Some would pretend they had never believed the accusations in the first place. Some would probably resent me for disrupting their comfortable assumptions about the neighborhood they lived in. I was prepared for all of it. What I was not prepared for was the rally. Saturday afternoon, a flyer appeared in mailboxes throughout Pinewood Ridge and the surrounding area. It announced an emergency community meeting at the community center on Sunday evening, the day before Tanya's article was scheduled to publish. The subject, protecting our neighborhood from outside threats. The flyer featured a photograph of the tree lot sale, smiling families, children holding candy canes, all under a banner celebrating Pinewood Ridge's community spirit. At the bottom, in bold letters, HOA President Donna Perez will address recent false accusations and explain how we can work together to defend our values. Donna was making a preemptive strike. She must have heard rumors about the investigation, perhaps from her contact in the commissioner's office, perhaps from someone at the newspaper who had tipped her off. She was going to try to control the narrative before the story broke, to paint herself as a victim of persecution and rally the community behind her before they learned the truth. I called Tanya and told her about the rally. She was quiet for a moment, then asked what I planned to do. I told her I was considering attending. She warned me against it. Anything I said could be used to undermine the story. And Donna would have supporters there ready to shout me down. But I had been thinking about this all afternoon, and I had reached a different conclusion. Donna had spent weeks attacking my reputation, turning my neighbors against me, trying to destroy my livelihood and take my land. She had done the same thing to Edward Harper, to the woman in the memory care facility, to Alexander Peterson's grandmother, to who knows how many others over the years. If I let the article do all the work, if I stayed home and waited for the newspaper to deliver justice on my behalf, I would miss the chance to look her in the eye when her lies fell apart. I would miss the chance to show the community who had believed her slander that I was not afraid to stand in the same room with her and speak the truth. The article would expose her crimes, but only I could reclaim my dignity. Sunday morning, I made copies of the key documents, the deposit slip showing Donna's personal account, the death certificate proving Edward Harper could not have signed his consent form, the financial comparison showing $341,000 in discrepancies, and the original survey proving my land had never been part of the HOA. I put them in a folder and set it by the door. I charged my phone and tested the voice recording app to make sure it was working. I did not plan to make accusations or cause a scene. I planned to ask questions calm, specific, documented questions that Donna would not be able to answer without either lying on the record or admitting the truth. And I planned to record every word, so that whatever happened could not be spun or denied after the fact. The rally was scheduled for 6 in the evening. At 5:45, I drove to the community center and parked at the edge of the lot, watching people file into the building. Families I had seen at the tree lot sale. Elderly couples walking arm in arm. Young professionals who had probably never attended an HOA meeting in their lives but had been alarmed by the flyers about outside threats. I counted roughly 150 people by the time the doors closed, inside. Donna Perez would be preparing to address them, to wrap herself in the flag of community protection, to point at me as the enemy they needed to unite against. She had no idea what I was carrying in the folder on my passenger seat. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, the story of her crimes would be on the front page of the County Herald, and she had no idea that I was about to walk through those doors and give her one last chance to tell the truth before everything she had built came crashing down. I picked up the folder, checked that my phone was recording, and stepped out of the truck. The December air was cold against my face. I could see lights spilling from the community center windows, hear the murmur of voices inside. I walked across the parking lot, pulled open the door, and stepped into the room where Donna Perez stood at a podium, microphone in hand, surrounded by the community she had been robbing for years. The community center was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled the main hall, and people stood along the walls where seating had run out. A banner hung behind the podium reading, "Pinewood Ridge, Neighbors Protecting Neighbors." Donna Perez stood at the front of the room in a navy blazer, her silver blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression radiating the concerned authority of someone defending her community against outside attackers. She was mid-sentence when I walked in, and her voice faltered for just a moment when she saw me. Then she recovered, pointing in my direction with one manicured finger. And there she is. The woman who has been spreading lies about this community, trying to steal property that belongs to all of us, filing false complaints with state agencies to harass your elected HOA leadership. Heads turned. I felt 150 pairs of eyes on me, most of them hostile, some merely curious. I said nothing. I walked to an empty spot along the side wall and stood there, folder in hand, phone recording in my pocket, waiting. Donna continued her speech. She talked about the sacrifices she had made for Pinewood Ridge over 8 years of service. She talked about the holiday tree lot and how it funded scholarships for local children, beautification projects that made their streets safer, and community events that brought neighbors together. She talked about outside agitators who wanted to destroy what they had built. People who moved into the area and immediately started causing trouble. People who did not understand or respect the values of a tight-knit community. She never said my name directly, but every accusation was aimed at me. The audience nodded along, some of them glaring in my direction. I let her finish. I had not come to interrupt or to shout. I had come to ask questions that she could not answer. When Donna paused to take a breath, I raised my hand. She ignored me. I raised it again and spoke clearly, loud enough for the room to hear. "Mrs. Perez, I have a question about the holiday tree lot fundraiser." She smiled tightly. "This is not a question and answer session. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the HOA office." I kept my voice calm. "I understand, but since you're discussing the tree lot tonight, I thought you might want to clarify something for your neighbors. The 2022 financial statement shows three-lot revenue of $67,450, but the HOA's bank records show only $12,400 deposited from that sale. Can you explain where the remaining $55,000 went?" The room went quiet. Donna's smile flickered. "I don't know what records you think you have, but our finances are audited annually and approved by the board. Everything is accounted for." I nodded and pulled a sheet of paper from my folder. "Then perhaps you can explain this. It's a deposit slip dated December 15th of last year, showing $55,000 deposited into an account registered to Donna M. Perez, not the HOA, your personal account. The source notation reads, Holiday Tree Lot, PRHOA. The murmur that went through the crowd was like a wave breaking against rocks. People shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward to look at the paper in my hand. Donna's face went pale. then read. That's a forgery. You fabricated that document to frame me. This is exactly what I warned you about. She's a scammer. She creates fake evidence. I interrupted her, still calm, still measured. The document has been verified by the State Banking Commission. The account number matches your personal checking account. The deposit dates match the annual tree lot sales for the past 4 years. Total amount diverted over $300,000. I paused, letting that number hang in the air. Mrs. Perez, you've been stealing from your neighbors, and I can prove it. The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding explanations, and turning to look at each other with expressions of shock and confusion. An elderly man in the front row stood up and pointed at Donna. Is this true? Have you been taking our money? A woman near the back called out. What about the beautification fund? My dues went up 40% for that fund. Donna gripped the podium with both hands, her composure cracking. This is a lie, all of it. She's twisting things, taking documents out of context. Someone else shouted. Then show us the real records. Open the books right now. Donna looked around the room, searching for allies, and found none. Even the board members seated in the front row, her sister Linda. Roger Flores, Carol Hayes were staring at her with expressions that ranged from confusion to barely concealed panic. Only Rick Shelton met her eyes, and his gaze was steady, almost satisfied. He knew. He had known for a long time, and he had finally found someone willing to bring it into the light. I raised my voice above the noise. There's more. The room quieted, though the tension remained like static electricity before a storm. Mrs. Perez, your HOA has annexed 7 properties over the past 6 years by filing boundary amendments with the county. One of those properties belonged to Edward Harper, a man who died on March 15, 2019. But the consent form surrendering his land to this HOA is dated July 22nd of the same year, 4 months after his death. I held up the death certificate and the consent form, side by side. Someone forged a dead man's signature to steal his property. The notary on that form is Linda Perez Marsh, your sister. Linda stood up abruptly, knocking her chair backward. Donna told me he had signed before he... Donna cut her off with a sharp look, but it was too late. The admission hung in the air, incomplete but damning. Linda had just confirmed that the signature was not authentic. She had just implicated herself and her sister in forgery. The doors at the back of the room opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in, followed by Deputy Kowalski and another uniformed officer. The crowd parted to let them through. One of the suited men held up a badge. FBI, Mrs. Perez, we need to speak with you regarding allegations of wire fraud and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Donna's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at the agents, at the crowd of neighbors who were now staring at her with a mixture of horror and betrayal, at her sister who had just accidentally confessed on her behalf. For one long moment, she seemed frozen, unable to process that her carefully constructed kingdom was collapsing around her. Then she did something I had not expected. She tried to run. She made it 3 steps before Deputy Kowalski caught her arm. The sight of her struggling against a uniformed officer, the woman who had called herself the protector of this community, who had accused me of being a criminal, who had weaponized her position to steal from her neighbors for years, silenced the room completely. No one moved. No one spoke. They watched as the FBI agents approached the podium, as Donna was escorted toward the door, as her sister Linda collapsed into a chair with her face in her hands. Roger Flores was already on his phone, probably calling a lawyer. Carol Hayes had slipped out a side exit. Only Rick Shelton remained seated, watching the scene with an expression of grim satisfaction. I stood against the wall with my folder still in my hands, my phone still recording, and felt nothing like triumph. I felt tired. I felt the weight of months of harassment and isolation and fear finally lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a hollow emptiness where the fight had been. Donna Perez was going to face justice. The money she had stolen would be traced and, hopefully, recovered. The properties she had illegally annexed would be returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. The system I had spent my career believing in, the system of documentation and evidence and due process, had worked. But it had taken everything I had to make it work. And as I watched Donna being led out of the community center, her face a mask of shock and fury, I wondered how many other communities had someone like her at the helm, quietly stealing, quietly corrupting, secure in the knowledge that no one would ever bother to check the paperwork. A woman approached me as the crowd began to disperse. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes, and I recognized her as one of the people who had avoided me at the hardware store weeks ago. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I believed her. We all did." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked out into the December night. Tomorrow, Tanya's article would run, and the whole county would know what had happened in Pinewood Ridge. But tonight, the only thing I wanted was to go home to my empty field, my rows of stumps, and sleep without dreaming of forged signatures and stolen trees. The legal consequences came swiftly. Tanya Sanders's article ran the morning after the rally, and by noon it had been picked up by news outlets across the state. HOA president embezzled over $340,000. Forged dead man's signature, read the headline. The story laid out everything: the fraudulent boundary amendments, the ghost parcels, the systematic theft from community fundraisers, the pattern of targeting vulnerable landowners. Donna Perez was arrested that same day and charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Her sister Linda faced separate charges for notarizing fraudulent documents. Roger Flores, the treasurer whose landscaping company had received tens of thousands in suspicious contracts, was placed under investigation. Within a week, the total amount of diverted funds had been revised upward to $412,000. The county moved quickly to distance itself from the scandal. The commissioner who had approved the fraudulent boundary amendments resigned, citing personal reasons. An internal review was launched into the clerk's office procedures that had allowed the fake surveys and forged consent forms to be filed without scrutiny. Alexander Peterson was quietly promoted to a supervisory position officially for his excellent work ethic. Unofficially because the county needed someone trustworthy overseeing the corrupted records. All 7 illegally annexed parcels were returned to their rightful owners or their estates. My property was formally removed from Pinewood Ridge HOA jurisdiction, with a corrected boundary map filed and certified by a licensed surveyor. The lien Donna had tried to place on my land was voided before it ever took effect. 3 months later, I received a letter from the district attorney's office asking if I wanted to submit a victim impact statement for Donna's sentencing hearing. I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper, thinking about what I wanted to say. I thought about the 847 trees stolen from my land. I thought about Edward Harper, whose signature had been forged after his death. I thought about Alexander Peterson's grandmother, whose garden had been paved over for developer profits. I thought about all the families who had bought trees at the holiday lot, believing their money was going to scholarships, never knowing it was filling Donna's personal accounts. I could have written about revenge. I could have demanded the maximum sentence. Part of me wanted to, but I knew the difference between justice and vengeance. In the end, I wrote 3 sentences Donna Perez stole from her community and forged documents to take property that did not belong to her. Her actions caused real harm to real people who trusted her. I ask only that the court hold her accountable in a manner that reflects the seriousness of what she did. Donna pleaded guilty to avoid trial. The federal charges resulted in 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The state charges added 2 years to be served concurrently. She was ordered to pay full restitution every dollar she had stolen. plus interest, plus legal fees incurred by her victims. Her sister Linda received probation and community service in exchange for cooperation with investigators. Roger Flores pleaded to a lesser charge and was barred from holding any position in a homeowners association for life. The Pinewood Ridge HOA was placed under court supervision while a new board was elected. Rick Shelton, the only member who had not been complicit, was appointed interim president. The following December, 1 year after I had discovered my empty field, I opened my farm stand for the first Christmas tree season. The trees I sold that year were not Fraser firs; those take 7 to 10 years to mature, and my stolen crop could not be replaced overnight. Instead, I partnered with a wholesale nursery to offer pre-cut trees while my own seedlings grew. It was not the business I had envisioned when I bought Edward Harper's land, but it was a start. Families came from across the county, some drawn by the news coverage, some by word of mouth, some simply looking for a good tree. I sold hot cider and let children pet the barn cats that had adopted my property. By Christmas Eve, I had made enough to cover my mortgage and put money aside for replanting in spring, on the last day of the season. A young woman pulled into my driveway in a car with out-of-state plates. She looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to stop her. She asked if I was Alice Vasquez, the one who had exposed the Pinewood Ridge scheme. I told her I was. She said her name was Michelle, and she lived in a small community 2 counties over called Maplewood Estates. Her HOA had recently announced a special assessment to fund infrastructure improvements that no one had seen evidence of. Fees had increased by 40%. A neighbor who asked questions at a board meeting had received violation notices the following week. She did not know what to do. She did not know who to trust. But she had seen my story, and she thought maybe I could help. I looked at her for a long moment at the fear in her eyes, at the folder of documents she was clutching like a lifeline, at the hope that someone would believe her. I recognized all of it. I had felt all of it. And I knew that the work I had done in Pinewood Ridge was not finished. It was just beginning. I smiled and gestured toward my kitchen door. "Come inside," I said. "I'll make some coffee, and you can tell me everything from the beginning."